Why are these orphans rejoicing? Because gifts to the Dorms for Orphanages Fund of Heaven's Family have provided them with new homes. Okay, let's get back into Matthew chapter 17. We finished Jesus' information there about John the Baptist and his connection to Elijah. And now he and Peter and James and John are coming down the mountain. Peter and James and John, can you imagine them? They've just had the experience of their lives. They just saw Moses and Elijah. These guys have been dead for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they just saw them, and they're not allowed to tell anybody about it. I feel so sorry for those guys. Although on the other hand, I feel jealous of those guys. They were so blessed, but they have to zip their lips tight and not give a word. And if one of the other disciples asked them, well, what happened up on the mountain? They have to say, something amazing, but I can't tell you. Not until Jesus is risen from the dead, whatever that means. All right, so here we are. They come down the mountain. We're in Matthew chapter 17 and verse number 14. Let's read a couple verses. When they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him and saying, quote, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. Okay, so this is a desperate man, a desperate situation. Our heart goes out to him, and we have many questions. Why? I'm not sure this story answers every question, but I'm glad it has a happy ending. I'm sure you've probably read it before. Now, we could keep going in Matthew, but Matthew devotes maybe about 8 or 9 verses to it, whereas Mark's gospel, which is generally shorter, overall in every respect to Matthew's gospel, in this case, he's got a lot more information than Matthew does, as well as Luke does on this particular story. So come on over with me to Mark chapter 9, and let's take this bit by bit. And we won't get through it all this time, but we're going to take our time and see what we can learn, okay? Mark chapter 9, verse number 14, read along with me. When they came back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. Scribes arguing with the 9 who had been left behind. Verse number 15, immediately when the entire crowd saw him, they were amazed and began running up to greet him. And he asked them, what are you discussing with them? That is, the scribes. What are you talking about with those guys? And verse number 17, one of the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought you my son, possessed with a spirit which makes him mute, not able to speak. And of course, Matthew didn't tell us that. Matthew just said his father said he's a lunatic and he's very ill. He falls into the fire and he falls often into the water. Now, back to Mark chapter 9 and verse number 18. Whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground and he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not do it. This is really a heartbreaking story, isn't it? And people say, well, this was epilepsy. Well, it had the characteristics of epilepsy, but it seems much, much greater than that, right? The kid sometimes is walking by a fire and suddenly he begins convulsing right at that strange time and he falls into the fire. So this kid may have burns on him. Sometimes they're walking by water, the Sea of Galilee or something, and all of a sudden he has convulsions and he falls off into the water and his dad's diving in there to say, so this thing's trying to kill him. And he's slammed to the ground. And of course, grinding his teeth and stiffening out, that could be epilepsy if it was by itself, and foaming at the mouth. It just is just heartbreaking. Let's just take a moment and look at what Luke says, okay? In his description of it, I'm reading now from Luke verse 38 of chapter 9. In this case, Luke tells us that the man says, I beg you, look at my son, for he is my only boy. And it makes it even more, desperate on his part, wow. And verse number 39, and a spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams. But we didn't get that from anyone yet. So, there's screaming going on here. and it throws him into a convulsion with foaming at the mouth, and only with difficulty does it leave him, mauling him as it leaves. So, this is heartbreaking. Any parent who would endure this would just be heartbroken and distressed and looking for answers. And of course, when this man heard about Jesus, who was healing all kinds of people of every kind of thing and casting out demons, he said, there's my solution. I got to get my son to Jesus. Well, he finds the general location where Jesus is at, but Jesus is nowhere to be found. There's 9 of his disciples, and they said, he's up at the mountain. He told us, stay here. Don't come up. And so he'll be back sooner or later. He comes back, but in the meantime, those 9 whom Jesus had already given authority to cast out demons and who had successfully cast out demons, you may recall, in the gospel accounts, when Jesus sent them out, they came back rejoicing, saying, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said, don't be so surprised. I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. So they had already successfully cast out demons by the authority that Jesus had given them. But in this case, with this young boy who had this terrible possession, the terrible demonization of this spirit that's trying to kill him, it looks like, they tried and they failed. Again, we read in verse number 18 of chapter 9, I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not do it. All right, so that is the first question that this little story begins to raise. These 9 guys gave it their best shot. They did what they had always done before, and this time, nothing worked. It didn't work like it had worked before. And Jesus reacts immediately upon hearing the news of their failure. And it's not like a good reaction in the sense of, he's not happy about it. He's very upset about it. Verse number 19 of Mark 9. He answered them and said, O unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me. Okay, well, we're unfortunately out of time, but we're going to go deep, deep, deep into this next time and find out exactly why they failed and how that applies to us. Can't wait. See you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.